My name is Steve Gilman, and for decades I've been helping brands engage with their audiences. On this podcast, we'll connect the dots in the fast-paced world of branding by talking with entrepreneurs, leaders, and marketers on the front lines of telling brand stories. Today we're talking with George Tannenbaum, ad industry veteran, respected copywriter, author of the blog Ad Aged, and founder of George Co. In this episode, we discuss big agency life, how creating content is your portfolio, and the rewards of being independent. So my guest today is George Tannenbaum, a true veteran of the advertising industry and kind of an icon of copywriting and creative for me, and the author of Ad Aged, one of the most insightful, well-written daily blogs on planet Earth, in my opinion, and that is not hype. If you don't follow Ad Aged and you don't follow George, after this episode, we'll have links, and I implore you to go follow this gentleman because his writing is impeccable and he's at the same time insightful and hilarious. So he is the chief George officer of George Co., which is my favorite job title anyone has. And if you're around the advertising industry, you probably know George. And if you're not, his resume reads like a who's who in advertising. I think you've worked for all the great brands, George.
Yeah, I got lucky.
Yeah. So you started at Lowe and Partners in the early 80s.
Yeah.
You worked for Rosenfeld and Sirowitz, and you were the youngest senior VP and head of creative, Ali Gargano.
Right.
FCB, Lowe and Partners, Publicis, Hal Rainey, RGA, Digitas, and then a nice long stint of executive director, copy chief for Ogilvy.
Right.
And now George Co.
Yes.
So that is quite a career path.
That's what happens, when you last 40 years.
Yeah.
Yeah.
How do you think you've gotten to a point where your voice is so clear and you're so fearless?
I mean, I think the fearless thing, I think the honest answer is probably also the cynical one is no one can hurt me at this point. I mean, they've already kind of kicked me out of the business for maybe a combination of being old, expensive, and opinionated. But, there's no one left to kind of, I don't, in the past, maybe I had to, we live in a very sensitive age, of course, but in the past, I'd have to worry about, agency politics or holding company politics or people I'm working with politics. I don't have any of that anymore. I was pretty, I think, candid when I was still within Ogilvy or WPP. But I think when I was let go, there's nothing they can do to hurt me.
Right, yeah.
I'm really not, in a way, and it's partly a function of today's economy, I'm really not competing with them anymore. We're kind of in radically different businesses.
Right.
So I have friends there still and associates, and I don't want to be, a jerk, but most people agree, if they let their hair down, even if they work for a holding company, they're kind of in agreement. I mean, it's about as corrupt as it can get.
Yeah, and it's a cold world too.
Yeah, and they're not. If you just look at the economics of the business, you can see why the whole thing is suffering. I mean, the economic. I'm not an economist, thank God, but I don't know how the economics work out, and I've been saying that for years. I mean, when Sorrell was around at WPP, in one year, if you remember, he literally made $100 million, and that's what they're announcing. And you walk around the halls, and people are pulling their hair out at 9 o'clock at night, and you say, well, they could have paid Sorrell $90 million, and they'd have $100,000 creatives here.
Yeah, right.
But they've chosen, so they chose that. I think most people see it. They might not think about it.
Yeah, that holding company philosophy, and I think one of the reasons your messages and what you talk about and the way you talk about it resonates so well with me and a lot of people is that, it's a message, whether it's about holding companies with advertising agencies or whether it's just about corporate America.
Yeah, it's corporate America.
The battle for efficiency over taking care of humans and being humane and paying people what they're worth, it's a big deal. I mean, when a CEO or a president of a company makes, $100 million and everyone
Yeah.
else is underpaid. That's just wrong.
Well, the last actual data I have comes from the Wall Street Journal, because about once a year they do a report on CEO pay. And Michael Roth, who is the CEO of IPG, I guess he's retired now. He's probably still being paid, but his annual income was, I believe, 260 times what the median employee made. And you can do the math. I mean, that's a lot. And would he'd still be living on Park Avenue
Yeah.
if he was making 150 times.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, so I don't, it's not, and I understand you could look at it from another point of view. He's creating a lot of wealth and shareholder value and all that stuff, but you do have to think of your employees sometimes. Especially, I pick on Michael Roth a little bit because he was one of the 219 executives from all over the country who signed a document about the economy needs to be more than about shareholder value. It needs to be about stakeholder value. And I haven't seen any. I mean, there was, if you remember, about 3 years ago, there was a big movement. It lasted about a week, and people were talking about stakeholder value, like what's in it for us and our family. And of course, it's more dire in other industries because you know vacated factories and towns that were built about around a GM plant, and another GM plant leaves, and what's left. But it's still, this is the industry that affects me.
Yeah. So that's what you talk about. Yeah, but I think I enjoy the just your tone and the way that you write, and because it's so honest. And I think the freedom that you have now that you're working for yourself, a lot of people would maybe be afraid of that. Like, I'm working by myself. I think I have to be even more conservative with what I say to the world. But you've really embraced it and gone full out, just honest George all the time, from what I see.
It's funny because when I was still at Ogilvy, I was friendly with a woman who had worked for many years at Ogilvy London and had done very well there, and they fired her for being outspoken or
Yeah.
whatever it was. And I have to say, probably I was, at Ogilvy for a while, my last 3 or 4 years, because I was, there weren't a lot of 60-year-olds
Yeah.
around
Right.
and making kind of an older salary. And I knew I was probably causing some people grief with the blog. And she said, George, you have nothing to worry about. Your brand is better than Ogilvy's brand.
Yeah.
And, I'm not saying that to be an ass, but it's probably, I mean, what have they done with their brand?
Yeah.
They've
Not a
they've
lot.
destroyed it.
Yeah.
Um, so I mean, they're not going to attack me. It's the classic challenger brand. I mean, I'm a one guy thing. They're you know whatever they are, 20,000 people. So they're not going to attack me. But I've had discussions. I'm friendly with certain people, like way up in WPP, and one of them, I'm not going to mention his name. He has no hair though. But he told me to cool it a little bit, and we know each other for 35 years. And I'm like, wait a second, you worked on, at other agencies, you worked on Burger King, you didn't cool it towards McDonald's. You worked on Mini, you didn't cool it towards, big cars. You worked on Microsoft, you didn't cool it towards Apple. I mean, we're trained
Yeah.
to go after enemies.
Right.
That's how you equalize someone else's advantage.
Yeah. And I think you going out on your own and kind of like even expanding your voice more. There was one thing you wrote that, when you discover somebody and you start reading their stuff, there was one thing you wrote that I was now hooked forever. And it was your analogy to, I've owned my own company for, this is 27 years now.
Wow.
So, completely independent. It's our own agency, but we're a
Right.
different breed of cat than the big global,
Right.
the big guys. We're sort of regional, semi-national. So we can do our own thing, but I've always been
Right.
fiercely independent. But you wrote something about paths of glory and this 3-4-3 ratio that I had never seen anyone put it into words. And the second I read that, I was like, yep, makes 100% sense. And I agree with that message entirely. Will you talk about that a little bit, that analogy?
It's funny. I mean, and not to sound pompous or anything, but there's a lot. there was a lot in those like two little metaphors.
Yeah.
Paths of Glory. I was always struck because it's the what Kubrick does is he juxtaposes kind of the opulence of executive management. In this case, it was the French military elite during World War One, and they're housed literally in chateaus and castles, from the Versailles era. And then you cut to a trench, and there's no one like Kubrick to get grit and dirt under his fingernails. You feel the filth, and you smell it, and the decay, and the bodies, and the mud, and the lice. And even if all he was doing was cutting back and forth between the two, almost like when you're at the optometrist, is this better or is this better? Is this better or is this better? He's making a point about whatever you want to call him. If you're Bernie Sanders man, the 1%, or if you're an advertising, the holding company versus, or the C-level versus the rank and file, or if you're, from a red territory, even like us versus the elites. I mean, there's that kind of contrast between the life some people get to live and the life masses of people get to live. And it struck me, having seen in my last 5 years at Ogilvy a lot of management changes, and it struck me as very sad. Okay, let me back up almost 20 years. About 20 years ago, I was put in charge of an agency in Boston called Digitas. And, they wanted it was a consulting agency. They wanted some creative flair, so they hired me. It's a big department. I had, about 150 creatives, and we couldn't fit all on one floor. And I knew if I sat on 17, and let's say 3/4 of the creatives were on 17, or 60% were on 17 and 40% were on 16. If I sat on 17, the people on 16 would feel denigrated. They would feel they weren't on the cool floor. They would feel there was something. It's the same thing if you're a small shop and you're sitting 8 offices away from the boss instead of next door to the boss.
Yeah. It's like a hierarchy that you feel.
Yeah, I knew it would be very hurtful to some people, and from a semiotic sense, from how it appeared, it was establishing a hierarchy that I didn't want. So I had enough power to have an office on each floor, and I tried to divide my time equally because I thought that was important. And I learned then, because this is my first time having like the job, like you don't talk to someone sitting behind a desk.
Right.
Actually, we just took my dog to the veterinarian. I picked her up on Thursday, but she got down on the floor to talk to my boss, my dog,
Yeah.
my
Right.
boss. But this is what people do to show they're with you.
Yeah. Right.
And what has happened, I think, much, in many ways in the agency world is, especially if you're creative, but probably it affects every department, is, the senior management are rarefied. They're off in their own wing. You don't need an office because we need collaboration. They all have offices. You can't take a black car home. They can. So the parallel, to jump to the Kubrick, they're in a castle. They don't know what it means to be dirty. And they don't, in the Kubrick movie, in Paths of Glory, the general is looking at a map and he says, I want you to take such and such a hill. He doesn't know that that's essentially suicide.
Yeah.
Because he's never down there. He's never left the castle. So, that was part of it. And then the 3-4-3, I think I have daughters who are grown, 34 and 29. And I think even from when I was a kid, maybe it was too much Leave It to Beaver or Father Knows Best on TV, but I think we have this illusion that, with the possible exception of Willy Loman, in Death of a Salesman, that work is supposed to be kind of fun and enriching every day.
It's supposed to be a blast. It's supposed to reward you at all times.
But it's not.
No.
And even even when, you're working, even when the optics say, I'm a left-handed pitcher for the Cardinals, I'm 11-4 so far this season. I'm doing great. There's still somebody who wants my job,
Right. Yeah.
or I'm 6'6" and my feet are hanging out the bed when I'm staying in the Holiday Inn in Milwaukee, and it sucks. And I mean, a lot of life just kind of like you got to get through it. Now you can't. So the 3-4-3 or whatever my equation was, it's you know 3 days are usually pretty good. 3 days where you want to, like, what the am I doing this for? I'm going to leave and never come back. And then 4 days it's kind of like, yeah, you just kind of, I'm not saying you go through the motions, but you're yeah, it's okay. And that's the way most things are.
It's like, yeah, some people are having good days and they're at their best. Some people are at their worst. And there's a lot of meh in there. So if you go back and look at someone's whole story, yeah, there were days where they were jerks and there were days they were heroes.
I went to a New York Times talk, and there was a marathon woman, Olympic marathoner, and she said, I had already had this thesis, but she said when she was coached by the Nike team, they kind of said, a third of your workouts you're going to feel like you can beat the world, a third you're going to feel like you can't make a junior high track team, and a third you kind of put in the miles because you have to do the work. And the trick is, when you feel like you can't make the high school track team, you draw on those days when you felt great and say, well, I'm going to push through it. And on the days you feel great, you say, well, I'm going to enjoy this, but tomorrow's another day.
Yeah, right. Who knows what tomorrow is going to bring me?
And I think it's that way in advertising too.
I think it is too. I think it's that way in business. I think it's like, you have to give yourself a lot of grace for having those days, and then you have to just not get stuck in them.
Yeah.
One of the things you wrote, and I thought it was really interesting because it's quite a moment in your journey, is you're out on your own now. You're a freelancer. And at first, I'm sure that was like kind of scary, just terrifying. So how's it going, man?
Well, there were two parts to it, Steve. One part I think no one talks about, or no one thinks about, or no one quite understands. And it's taken me a while to get a hold of it, which is, when you're older and in an agency, and even the largest agency isn't that large, there's some kind of institutional love that forms around you.
Sure.
Like, the young people look up to you, the people in your account know what they can turn to you for and what you're good at, and there's just, like, you walk into a room and people, oh, well, George is here, or whatever, and you're 62, and there's, your kids have left the house already, and you kind of have, your office children, and you have this whole thing, and you have a place for your books, and people are asking you, can I show you this piece of copy? It's not your job, but you do it because you're part, in a sense, of a community.
Yeah, and you're needed.
And then all of a sudden somebody calls you into a conference room and you're gone. So for me, it wasn't really a fear about losing money.
Right.
And, like, how am I going to pay my mortgage or whatever? It was really this sense of being exiled.
Yeah.
If you think about it almost from an immigrant point of view, like, I'm leaving the home I love. And I know love is a strong word, and
No, I get it.
based on what we were just talking about,
Yeah.
but there were feelings there.
When you're with the troops and they're your people, there is a feeling of love. It's your team. You're on a team. Sometimes it's imperfect, but it's still your team, man.
Right. And I don't think anyone considers it, because as much as, every job now is, oh yeah, we're welcome to the team.
Yeah.
That kind of bullshit.
Yeah.
You're only a team.
There's that.
Yeah.
And there's the real actual team when you're in the trenches together and no one sees it because you're just sweating over something. There's like the actual genuine thing that forms between people, and then there's the BS corporate
Right.
team. Yeah, I get you.
Right. I'm not stupid, and I saw how Ogilvy was doing, and I had my boss, who was the chief creative officer at Ogilvy, had been fired maybe a year before I was, and he had landed a job. I got fired ultimately in January, and but by September we were kind of in late stage negotiations for me to at least freelance for him,
Right.
while if something happened. I didn't want to leave,
Yeah.
but I felt like, okay, it was time, or I saw that my time was coming. It would be a little bit like if I ran a clothing line for husky men, and then all of a sudden the creative director decided he was gonna use the same name and just make it for skinny men. I'm out.
Yeah, right.
So
You're done.
yeah, so I kind of knew, my kind of time had come, and I wanted to be prepared for it. And so in terms of kind of having a place to go, I wasn't allowed to work right away because of severance things, but I knew I had a place to go, and I wasn't really worried about that. It was more that I felt stripped, and the calculus that people don't really consider is, how am I going to fill 70 hours a week?
Yeah.
This is pre-COVID.
Yeah,
I
right.
mean, you got to fill 70 hours a week. My older daughter was a Division I swimmer, and so practice, her weekly practice was 70,000 yards of swimming. And she's 18 and she's swimming 70,000 yards a week. That's a lot of time. So she blows out her shoulder. All of a sudden she's got like 28 hours with nothing to do. Guess what happens? Trouble. So it's the same thing that happens to old people. You get. I didn't get into trouble, but you're nervous. You cry. You get upset. You don't know what you're going to do, and then COVID hit.
Yeah. That makes it a lot more fun.
Yeah. So it was kind of, it was nerve wracking.
I bet. So now that you've been doing it a while, how's it changing for you? What's the culture of working with you and you?
There's some parts of it that I really like, in that I like the control, and this sounds stupid almost, but the thing that I find myself saying a lot is that the relationship between hard work and money
Yeah.
is restored. Because if you're working for someone else, you're not an hourly worker, and you're killing yourself, and especially in a holding company system, you're not getting paid anymore. You're getting to keep your job. So, and advancement and salary and raises don't really happen that much anymore. So, the ratio between labor and pay is gone. So having that back is really good. I don't really have an internal governor, so I tend to work too much. And you also, I'd be interested in what you have to say about it. You also don't know if your busyness is how it's going to go, or if it's an anomaly.
Yeah. Right.
I mean, it's only been, whatever, 18 months for me. So I haven't really had a slow period, but then I don't say no to things.
Yeah. Right. So what if you do?
Yeah. And so I'm still learning.
Yeah. I think it's running your own thing and being in charge of it. We're a fairly small agency. We keep it small on purpose. I don't want a huge team because I've never had to lay anyone off. And, that's very purposeful. But anytime you're in business for yourself or you're out on your own, the one thing that you get good at over time is being comfortable with uncertainty. And that's something that when you're an employee, it's a very different feeling. So it's kind of the opposite side of you get to see the fruits of your labor a lot better. The input and output, like we do this, they like it, they rehire us, they pay us, just like with you. It's exhilarating. It feels good. Sometimes it goes really well. The other part of it is that you give up that it's on you to keep it going, and it's on you for real. And I think it's just a different, there are times that drives me a little nuts, but honestly, over the years, I've just gotten comfortable with it. It's just my reality now.
Yeah, sometimes I feel, I mean, I called my company George Co., and I wanted to be a one person thing because it took me a long time in the business to realize either I have a unique approach or a unique way of thinking or something, but people are coming for me. And I didn't want them to come for me. Not that, Charlie or Rich or Mark aren't better than I am, but they're coming for me. And so I really just wanted I didn't want to be an administrator. I didn't want to have meetings. I didn't really want to have status reports. I just wanted to do the work. I have, some people who help me occasionally. Occasionally I'll get, I'll have something where I'll need a producer, and I have an account director who works for me part-time. And I have an art director who works for me when, I need her or him. Um, but, usually what I've found, and I don't know if you have found a similar thing, is there's a lot of brands who don't really know what they're in business to do.
Yeah, no, there are.
And I mean, even when I was working at Riney or IBM, it's like, I mean, I worked on IBM for 12 years. I can't tell you what they do anymore. I mean, I think they need um, to have their crystals read or something. Like, I don't know what business you're in. I
No,
mean,
it's true.
it's got to be more than just AI, quantum, and blah blah blah. I mean, so what do you guys do? I mean, how do you make my life better?
I think being really close to what your input and your output is like it's harder in some ways, but it's also yours while you're doing it. So there's a lot of there are a lot of rewards, and then there are some drawbacks. So you just it almost you have to retune to it because it's the challenges and the things you put up with are different than what you used to.
Yeah, it's I find it hard to shut down.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
But it's only been since March really of 2020, so it hasn't been that terribly long. So I've learned a lot in 18 months. Yeah, it's and more good days than bad.
Good. I'm glad. I think that's one of the things you learn when you're running your own thing is you find that balance eventually. And sometimes it's gonna just like the 3-4-3. Sometimes it's gonna go wildly out of balance for a series of weeks or months, and you've got to rein it back in. And but the bottom line of you being closer to what you actually do and delivering what George delivers, I think is one of the great things about when you're doing your own thing and not working for a big company, is that it's something you can enjoy. You have to enjoy writing on some level, or you wouldn't do it.
It's funny because when you work for a big company, nobody just has one boss. You have four or five. There might be nominally on paper you report to this one, but everybody has a slightly different interpretation of how to do the job. And so a lot of your psychic energy is, well, Jeff is going to get pissed off if I actually do the writing myself, if I don't find a team to do this. But Steve wants me to do it because he knows I have a unique way of doing it. And Joan would love to have me do it, but she knows I bill out it too much. So she's going to want me to turn it over to Dennis, at the end of 12 hours. And it's like, I just want to do the thing and not worry about any of the math.
Yeah, and I think that's the freeing part of being in business for yourself. And we have a good sized team, but not so big that we have those kind of dynamics because I can't do what these other guys do. So I do what I do well, and I try to leave them the heck alone and let them do what they do well. And we don't have, once you get a little bit bigger than that, and I certainly have clients where I see this all the time, where their internal politics get in the way of doing the actual work.
Right.
So getting that calculus out of what you do every day, that's, for when people are in big companies, I feel like they spend their half the day, that is their work. Navigating is the work instead of the work.
And that's really that consumes a lot
It
of
does.
energy.
And bandwidth.
It's like living in an abusive home
Yeah.
because you're always kind of, what happens if I go into this room? Is it empty? Or is someone going to yell at me?
Yeah, right. What's going to happen if I go to this meeting? And yeah, I've worked inside large organizations, and that is absolutely true.
Yeah, so it's that's freeing.
Yeah, I bet it is. Yeah, well, also the fact that you write every day and you put out an amazing amount of content, and I have no idea how you.
I don't even know how I do it.
I bet you don't, but you have a gift for that, and obvious a lot of talent for it. But, being able to communicate the way you do, I think there's probably a real need and a real drive to keep, doing that kind of work. And I think that's probably what makes you so good at what you do.
I mean, some of it, I'll attribute to a woman I only know over the phone, a recruiter called Christy Cordes, who really helped me. And about 20, 25 years ago, she's never placed me or anything like that. I don't know if she was walking on the street in front of me, if I'd know who she is. But we've stayed connected. And basically, about 20, 25 years ago, when LinkedIn was coming in, she said, George, people are going to start looking at portfolios in an entirely different way.
Yeah.
And a portfolio is kind of a retrospective on your work. But today we can show what we do every day. And that's a change in orientation where I could show you, I mean, I'm proud of my portfolio, don't get me wrong, but that's all work that went through committees and 97 rounds of revisions and great directors and this and that and the other thing. And it's all work I did in the past where this is something, the paint's still wet. So you get to, so if you take the advertising kind of dicta, show, not tell, well, I get to show every day what I can do. And you don't have to like it every day. I don't care because I'll have something different tomorrow.
And you don't get to edit it. No one else gets to edit it, So it's like very much you and your brand, which I think is really cool.
And it's an ad. I mean,
yeah,
it's an ad. So it's like, that's what I do.
Yeah.
And I'm like most people, the people I don't trust are the people who say they're not competitive. But like most people, I'm very competitive.
Yeah.
And it's like, you go do it better.
Yeah, right.
That's fine with me. If
Here's
you can do it better, more power to you.
Yeah, and if you want a different flavor, go get a different flavor.
Right.
But this is my thing. I think that's really great, man. So what do you think I'm going to ask you a couple of just quick questions. What do you think the common traps for like creative directors and copywriters are in the industry right now?
Well, I mean, for me, and I've always been extremely hands-on, it's getting hands off. It's I've heard creative directors talking to account people and they call the people who work for them the creatives. No, you're a creative. Once you've like let go kind of your craft and you're an administrator, like go home. It's like you should be proving you can I mean that to me is the fight. And maybe it's my own ego and my fear of getting older and whatnot. But, even now, I'll get a call. Usually I deal right with clients at a pretty senior level, but 5 times a year, 8 times a year, I'll get a call directly from an agency. And agencies don't pay as well because they've got to, pay for the rent in the offices in Malaysia and, Buenos Aires, and so they can't give me the money. But I do it because I want to make sure that my standards are at least as high as the standards in the industry. And I think if you lose that as a creative director, that you're doing the work, you can still do it. And so I guess part of me always felt like as a creative director, I should be around to take the worst assignments and help on the best.
Good for you, man.
Because to your point a second ago, you kind of want to be able to free people who can do things that you can't do. But for you to do that, you have to work.
Yeah, you do. And you have to like know when to get out of the way. And that's interesting because the reason I started this podcast, and we haven't been around a ton of time, but this is my passion. This is what I love to do. And honestly, like there is no one out there telling the story of people who do the work. Like it's always on podcasts, you always hear from the CMO. You always hear from someone at the top of the food chain because it's like you're trying to put stars of industry on your podcast. And I just want to talk to the people
It's a name on the marquee.
Right.
Yeah.
And I want to talk to the people who make the sausage.
Right.
Because it is messy and it's crazy and it's cool. And I think all of us are storytellers in different ways. So if I talk to like a CEO, I usually pick someone who's a great storyteller, And for you, I want to talk to you because I read your stories, and they are ads, but it's beautiful storytelling.
Thank you.
It's just beautiful storytelling. So, what do you think is one of the most challenging things when you're working with other people, with clients, or with someone that you're, trying to help about storytelling that people don't understand?
It's funny. I could do like a whole stand-up routine on
Yeah,
this,
I bet.
um, because the phrase storytelling is it's come into vogue maybe the last 5 to 7 years,
It has.
and along the same time it's come into vogue, what else has happened, in my opinion, is people have forgotten that we're supposed to have fun at work. We're supposed to kibitz around. We're supposed to tell jokes in meetings, and so on and so forth. So, I mean, you'll notice with me, I never give a fast answer. I mean, if you ask me the capital of Kansas, I can give a fast answer. But chances are I'll say, well, it used to be this, and then they moved it here because there was a slavery issue, a free state, slave state. I'll probably have a little more complicated answer. But what I found is, you'll have a meeting on storytelling, and then they'll say, well, George, could you talk to us about what you do? And you'll say, it's funny. Many, many, many years ago, I read this ad, and I think it's a perfect example of storytelling. And you see everyone in the room going, come on, come on, come on, come on. Come on, speed it up. And so it's like they want the storytelling
Without the
but
storytelling.
without but they want it in a 7-second soundbite. You can't get them both.
No, you can't. You absolutely can't.
So either you're true to wanting these stories, and I mean a story has a natural arc.
Yep.
You have to live with bits of it, or let's just not use the term. Like if you just want me to read off a PowerPoint slide, I'll do it.
Yeah, and also if you want to produce like a gag or a bit, like a really quick gag and a really quick bit that's going to make someone smile because it's a little thing of content, fine. That's a thing. We can do that. But it's not a story. Like a story has a beginning, middle, and an end. It has an arc. And it's like I'm from a theater directing background. So I have the same pet peeve. It's like stories work because they work, and they will always work.
Right. I mean, if you ever looked at Kurt Vonnegut, I can send it to you. There's a old film of Kurt Vonnegut. It's called The Shape of Stories. It's only about 4 minutes.
Please send me
And
that.
and I think for his doctoral thesis or his master's thesis, he literally graphed stories. So he says, I'm going to call the story Man in Hole. Oh, there's a man in a hole. It's dark and it's raining. Oh, he gets out of the hole. I mean, that's a story. And you kind of have to talk about, this is Roger. He fell into a hole. It's wet. There's worms. It's disgusting. Oh, there's a twig. He grabs onto the twig. Oh, he pulls himself up. He's out. I mean, that's kind of a story. And you can't just say, yeah, this guy fell in a hole, he got out. That's not interesting. I could make that story interesting, but you got to give me a little time.
You know what? I'm so glad you brought that up because I talked to Ken Marcus. I know you know him, and we talked a lot about, brands kind of getting away in this just lately in the last, I don't know how many years, getting away from using comedy and starting to really talk about purpose. And that's fine. Some brands that works great. Sometimes I'm not walking around thinking about your purpose. Maybe I just need to be entertained and told a story.
I want a hamburger.
Yeah.
Like it'd be great if there's no plastic in the ocean, but I want a hamburger.
Right now, I just want to be pleased
yeah.
because I'm a consumer. So
Right.
I think that that rub is something that's going on in the industry
Yeah.
right now. And sometimes it really does work. Sometimes the heartstrings are the perfect things to pull. Other times it's the funny bone, and it's a different technique for a different product at a different time. So
Exactly.
and I see you doing both in your writing. You wrote one thing, you've written a couple things that have touched me like really deeply, and then a few that have just made me laugh out loud.
Yeah, usually I try to be funny on Fridays
Yeah, well,
because
I appreciate
readership
it.
is low.
There's some good laughs in there, man. Like, well, I'll talk to you about them at some point. So what do you think? I know as a copywriter, I'm sure, and this may be with new clients or people you've worked with, is there a myth about writing that you could speak to? Is there a misconception that people think?
Well, I mean, I think, there's a lot of pretentiousness around it. There's a lot of like, I'm not in the mood, or I'm not inspired, or I'm not this.
Yeah.
You don't, I think that's a luxury if you do something for a living. I mean, if you were taking your Volvo into the garage and the guy said, "I'm just not in the mood to drain the oil," um,
I have to feel it.
yeah, I mean, there, and I'm not saying that what we do isn't more creative and brings up more bits of the soul or whatever, but sometimes, the hardest bit of writing is just deciding I'm going to write, and it doesn't have to be perfect, but I'm going to start putting things down and start shaping it and start having something to work from. And a lot of times I'll say to clients, I'm very fast, and clients will say, well, wow, you did that so fast. And I'll say, well, listen, because I don't like to talk about writing theoretically. I want to show you something, and then we have a common ground to work on. So I don't want to say I'm going to give you a piece of writing that's very emotional and it's going to talk about the soul of this and your drive to accomplish that. I want to show it to you, and you say, "That's really good. I like that feeling, but you left out this part." Okay, now I know what I have to do, and I can move it ahead. So I feel like that is just. I mean, maybe I'm just a lucky person in that I've gotten over that fear of putting things down. But it's taken me a lot of practice too. I mean, the blog, I've probably written 2 million words on the blog. So I have more practice than you.
Yeah,
So practice.
right.
Yeah.
I think
So practice.
that's great advice. I mean, I think it's, for anything you're going to be good at and anything you're going to do it. Do it when you don't feel like it.
Exactly. I mean, if you're a ball player, I mean, I think about the hours and hours and hours you spend just tossing a ball to a friend. Where it's completely mechanical. You're not aiming, you're not putting zip on it. You're just going through the motions. You're building the muscle memory, and I mean, you kind of have to do that.
Yeah, and I think with copywriting and things that are in the quote unquote creative field, there is muscle memory. And what happens is that moment of inspiration where someone puts you on the spot. When you have muscle memory, you're gonna have something to do at that moment.
Well, I just got through one of those instances. I mean, literally, I had my first business trip as a soloist about a month and a half ago, and it was for a client, a brand new client. It was for a field I know nothing about, and I actually missed the flight. I showed up to the meeting late, and I thought there was going to be about 10 people in the room, and there were 75. And they asked me, I mean, almost literally to tap dance out a manifesto after about an hour. And, in front of everybody, and
Nothing
it's,
like getting put on the spot.
yeah, but, I mean, IBM/Ogilvy was a lot like that too, where, it's 10:30 at night, and somebody needs a 4-page print insert, and you go, "Where's the brief, George? You'll figure it out." And I mean, I'm sorry, that's I've written a couple times on the blog lately. I read a book not too long ago about this general. I'm going to forget his name. He was a World War II general, Max something or other. He was one of the few Jewish generals, and he was involved in the D-Day invasions, and he became known as the Panzer Killer. He was wildly successful, and as a fighting general. And again, back to the paths of glory, a lot of the generals would stay in the back. And he had something the French call, and I can't pronounce French at all, coup d'oil. It's like Trump to oil, but the
Yeah.
word coup. And it really just means battlefield vision. So if you think about, like, if you read some books on, say, the Civil War, when Robert E. Lee was in Gettysburg, he knew where the cannons should be. He knew where these troops should be. He knew where these troops should be. So did the opposing generals. That's why it's such a colossal battle. But, you can read the battlefield and make decisions in ways. I mean, I know this sounds like Malcolm Gladwell, and make decisions in a way that it's not cognitive. It's I did a spot. I don't think it's on my reel, for Watson with Sir Ridley Scott, um, and he was in conversation. Joe Pytka was the director, so you have two colossal egos, and I had to sit in with them while they were talking about what we were going to do and how I'm going to write the script, and a little daunting because for many reasons, and I guess and Pytka and Ridley Scott know each other, and I guess they're as much as Pitka's friendly with anyone, they're friendly. And Ridley Scott says something kind of offhanded, and he says, "Well, I've shot 2,000 commercials. When I come into a room, I know where the lighting's going to go. I know where I'm going to put the camera." And Pitka, being competitive and insecure, says immediately, "Well, I've shot 4,000." But my point, I mean, that's funny.
Yeah,
But
it is.
my point is, it's the same way. If you were sitting next to Ted Williams in the dugout, he would see a guy puts out his tongue when he's throwing a curve, his elbows dipping in a little bit, and I'm going to pick up weaknesses, and he would see things that other great players can't see, and that's why we have to pay attention. I mean, you have to kind of stay. I mean, I goof around as much as anyone, but you have to um, stay tuned into the situation because you will get called on at the last minute to step up. And what do you think?
Yeah. And the reason for all those reps and all the muscle memory is that you have to be able to trust yourself in the moment because it isn't in here all the time. It isn't like, oh, let me think about this and I'll come up with something. It's instinct and gut. And it's all that muscle memory and all that writing or directing or whatever it is
Exactly.
that tells you, you know exactly where the lights go no matter what.
Yeah, and you can't really. There's no logic to it. You just have to sometimes. If you look at a good cook, they'll just put a little more
They
salt in. They
just
haven't
know.
even tasted it.
Yeah.
It's just a feeling.
Yeah. And that's I think one of my favorite thing about working with creative people that are great at what they do. And I performed improv for years and have a theater background. So the essence of improv is trusting yourself. I mean, you're up there, you have no idea what you're going to say. Like, so you could say something terrible, shocking, funny, whatever it's going to be, but you've done enough reps that you just get out of your own way and so same thing with writers, same thing with everything.
Yeah, and the consequences are not that great
Yeah,
if something screws up. I
right.
mean, we are not, heart surgeons. And, if I say something, and I almost always say, well, this could be dumb, but what if we did this? And, oh, that's not really dumb. I think that's actually pretty smart. And, it's based on having been doing it for a lifetime and, and all that muscle memory. And, 80% of what we do is just to look at a problem upside down and backwards.
Yep.
Because if you tell it the same way, it's going to be boring.
Yeah. I mean, that is really the essence of it. So let me ask you another question. I've got a couple more and then I promise I'll let you go on time, which is coming up. So this last year with COVID and, you said you went on your first solo trip. What was the highlight of this past year for you? Because I know it was a deeply odd year.
I had a good year financially. I've built, I won't call it a book because I don't know how much it's going to repeat,
Yeah.
a business. But I think beginning to gain some of that confidence that the phone is going to ring or, I'm going to get a call. It usually comes when you least expect it. And then number, that's part of it. And I think the corollary part is having confidence in pricing yourself well. And in a sense, separating yourself from the pack through pricing. Because it's easy to be one of the gang and it's harder to stand out. And I think, obviously no MBA here, but I think, a pricing strategy is really important. And I think, if you looked at an Apple computer and a Dell computer from a component cost point of view, they're probably $4 difference, is my guess, or a Hyundai and a Mercedes. But to have the confidence to charge the premium because all that spills out of that premium, the quality, the confidence, the integrity, the logic, the presentation, the thoughtfulness. It takes the easiest thing in the world is in a world of kind of fast food restaurants to open up another fast food restaurant. And I think you wanna establish a little bit of, I mean, it's marketing. You wanna establish kind of a differentiation. So it took me a long time, a lot of sweat to start when I started putting proposals together. Because holy shit, how can I ask for that much as a day rate?
Yeah,
Or
right.
what are you crazy? The rest of the industry is asking this, and I'm going to ask for this plus, and I'm never going to get this. And I would perseverate. I would talk to friends. I would talk to my wife, and I don't know if you should do that, George. That's a lot of money. And then I just, you know what? Yeah, at some point you have to kind of mantraize yourself, like I'm the best there is. It's not saying much, but I'm going to do it. And if you don't get the work, then you have to reevaluate.
Yeah, but if you get the work, and also, you've got a combination that I think is really rare and very marketable in that you have an extremely clear voice and a very clear style. And, I've talked to other guests about this and a few friends about, it's all about attraction. The clients that need you are going to find you. And then the price for what you're going to deliver in quality is well worth it because they're going to be the people that want to pay for that and they're going to get what they pay for. And then there's going to be some people that are like, no, I can't, I don't want that. And that the thing with that is you don't want to work with those people either.
Exactly. I mean, there's, every once in a while, there's someone, who literally calls me out of the blue, and I like him as a person. I'll get on the call with him, and we kibitz around. We're having a fun time, and they ask for a proposal, and I send them a proposal, and they fly away like a bird, and
Yeah.
it's like, well, you know what? I could chase you. I could say what happened. I could negotiate, but my wife and my wife really bought this little house up here in Connecticut and needs a lot of work. And I guess, the first couple of times we had workmen come in, she said, well, is that negotiable? And they look at her like, are you crazy?
Yeah, it is.
Like,
That's what it
I've
costs.
worked my whole life. This is,
I'm good at this. This is what it costs.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. And we're not choosing where the trillionaires buy from, but we're choosing a good quality, and that's why we're choosing it. We could choose a handyman to do this stuff, but we're choosing
Well,
professionals.
there's a lot of safety in that for the person buying. And there's a lot of
Right.
like, and that's why I think, you know, there's, it's a better way to go about it by setting a price that works for you because you're going to connect the people that want to pay it and don't run away are the people you should be working with.
If they're trying to get you down a couple $100, like you don't want. I mean, what's the difference, boys and girls?
And if you're that far away, it's not a good fit. If you're further away than that. So yeah, good for you. I'm glad it's going well, man, because your talent is just, it's extraordinary. And I'll be following you. I'll be looking at your posts every morning. That's how I read your stuff every morning, man. I love it. So I've got one final question for you, and I'll let you go have your evening. This is a question I always like to ask everyone. If you were going to talk to your younger self, what advice would you give yourself at this point?
Without being a pushover, I would say make sure you're raising your hand a lot.
Yeah.
There's a lot of young people, and the question was about young people, think if they ask for something, they're asking for a favor instead of doing a favor.
Yeah.
Right? Like,
Right.
hey, Steve, I'd like to show you my portfolio. Please, you're doing me a favor because you're going to take time from your busy day to look at my portfolio and critique it rather than, hey, Steve, I have a great portfolio. Your life is going to be easier if you start giving me work. And, I don't know that I could have done that at 23 or 24, but by the same token, it wasn't all that comfortable doing it 57 or 58 either. And it's a little bit, to go back to some earlier questions, it's a little bit what I have to do now. I mean, a lot of times I get, what I kind of jokingly call the dump truck brief, where the visual in my head is, a giant dump truck of PowerPoint decks backing up to my yard, and beep, 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 it lifts up and there's 58, PowerPoint decks, and George, you figure it out. And, you can only spend so much time figuring out, then you have to put words on paper. And so you're kind of going, okay, well, I'm gonna figure this out. Did I get it or not? I don't know going into
I'm
it.
going to step up and try. I mean, I think that and raising your hand is
Yeah,
some of the
the
best
same thing,
advice.
really.
Yeah, and it's some of the best advice for young people or any time in your career where, and I agree with you, I've observed when someone raises their hand and just wants to help someone else, to honestly really just want to help, that's going to get you really far.
Yeah,
Just try to help, because a lot of times
right.
when you do, that's when people realize, wow, this guy's really talented, or this
Yeah,
woman's really talented. Yeah, so that's great, man. Thank you so much
yeah.
for today.
Hey, my pleasure, Steve.
I had a blast talking to you, man.
Yeah, likewise.